Okay.
I recently got an email from Lora, and oh my goodness, the story. She was working in the PA Department of Corrections with insane inmates. It's just one part of the story. Axe murderers, serial killers. Bill Cosby was in the system at one point.
He's in.
So we're gonna get into all that in this interview. So, what was your position? Thanks for coming on the interview. And what was your position? And when did you join the Department of Corrections?
Okay, yeah, I'll give you some backstory on that. Um, I graduated college in 91. I have a degree in psychology. In 1994, I moved back to Pennsylvania because my family's from here. So I had picked up a job as a corrections officer in a county prison called Susquehanna County. I was only there for a very short period of time, about 18 months, because those are very difficult jobs for women to be in. At that point, I got a job working as a drug and alcohol counselor. That is my specialty. Like, I would be somebody that you go to if you have drug addictions. I'm the person that handles, the crack addictions, heroin addictions, you name it. That's me. So during the time frame from 94 to 98, I was working in outpatient treatment on the streets. I was trying to get into corrections, honestly, only because the money is so substantial compared to just street therapy. When took the job, it's like a $10,000 raise. So of course you could see my reasoning behind wanting to work there. But I had no idea about the politics in any way, shape, or form. So then in 98, I got hired, and the story starts from there. So,
So, what,
um,
what was your first day like in that environment?
it was very surreal for me. As probably only way I could explain it to you, to be in it, because you have to remember these prisons in Pennsylvania, they're not in cells. Like I don't like I'm very familiar with where you were at in Arizona. Because that whole timeline, you were like running, your story runs parallel with mine in that sense, because that Sheriff Arpago, that was like big news in the corrections, area. Um, so the way most of those cells in Pennsylvania are set up is the inmates are just kind of walking around like everywhere. Like they're not in cells, they're in more of a dorm like setting. So my first day, here I am. I started when I was 28, 29. It's very surreal. Like I just didn't know women couldn't wear makeup to work. I didn't know you couldn't take a purse. Like things that normal people do, I couldn't do that. So I could just remember being left alone in a room with 50 plus inmates that like I'm not that big. I'm 5'4", 120 pounds. I mean, these guys could murder me in a heartbeat, and that's a reality. So my mind frame was kind of like, it's not if I'm going to get raped, it's how many times I'm going to get raped if something should happen. No, that's unfortunately that's how your mind becomes, because that's how sick of an environment it is. So, my first day it was a lot of learning. Luckily, I had three really great guys that I worked with that were about 10 years older than me. They had been in the system for a very long time. They kind of mentored me, but they were really smart. One was my supervisor he ended up dying. He had a horrible story too, believe it or not. He was arrested and, oh, just a nightmare. The other one died, and the one, I think there's one still living somewhere, but the average lifespan is about 50 if you work there. Just bear that in mind. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So it's just ever present danger.
It on so many levels. Like it's this chess game times 20, because you really have to maneuver around. Like you first, obviously, the inmates. You've got to you have to have some kind of alliance with those inmates, obviously. You have to staff. I think staff were the biggest nightmares, honest to God, over the inmates. It's just such a learning experience, and you become pretty street smart fast. I mean, I grew up in an upper middle class family. Like I didn't have any intention of doing this at all. So
What's the racial mix in PA?
Well, oh God, I wish my husband was here. I would say highest obviously would be the African American population, which are going to be dealing with the Bloods and the Crips there. Islamic, like radical Islamic too. I would say that's your highest population. I'd say probably 75%, and many very, very poor because they kind of, obviously our system in the United States thrives on poor people and putting them into jail. That is the number one game. They're such easy targets. Once they're in the system, and I even have paperwork to show you, they can nail them on fines, they can nail them on anything. So they love you to be in that cycle. That because that never ends, basically. White people, excuse me, Caucasian people, I would say were a very, very small percentage, maybe about 25%, and maybe about 25% Spanish. It depended. I dealt with a lot of Spanish gangs like Latin Kings, Nayada. Those were always, the guys that I was dealing with. So the Caucasians were obviously like the Aryan Brotherhood, that kind of stuff. So,
Was there gang warfare while you were working?
Um, in terms of what, like me, or how was it?
Gangs
All
trying to kill each other?
Oh God, yeah. Oh my God. Especially out in yard, I that was a big thing. I mean, there was about 500 inmates in a yard, and there was nothing for one female guard to be out there. That is not even a lie. One or two guards, maybe one female and one male. I mean, that ratio to me is just incredible. Like, I don't, e- I could, I, you couldn't pay me enough money to walk into that yard. It's that scary. Like, you feel like, it's just such a, I just have such a developed gut feeling of danger. And I imagine you probably do too because of where you were at, but it's just like, I'm always like on that hyper, it's intense, like, oh my God, something's going to happen to me.
So
So
how
yeah,
how how often was the violence?
constantly, constantly. And it happens so fast. I mean, I think that's what people don't realize. Somebody can get their throat slashed within seconds, and it happens so fast that it's just amazing. Like you can't even see it at times. It happens so fast. So
So you're saying the violence was constant. Are you saying like someone was getting stabbed every day, every week?
yeah, there was constant that kind of stuff down. The one really weird thing about this particular prison, and it's called state correctional, but they always call them SCIs here. So I don't know if you knew that or not. But I was at SCI Waymar, and that prison is a lower level prison, but it is very, very highly populated with sex offenders. So to the point where they have their own block. They have, I believe, two blocks still because they have to go through intensified therapy while they're there, which is kind of pencil whipping it for the parole board. It's not really. I mean, there's no fixing these guys, to be honest with you. So there was a lot of nonsense with them, a lot of gang rivalries, obviously with the Crips and the Bloods, a lot of issues with with the Aryan Brotherhood, that kind of stuff. But in my particular case, I sort of had protection from the Aryan Brotherhood, if that makes sense to you, because obviously physically I'm white and I'm blonde, so they're like, okay, this is perfect. We're going to go to her. They do that, and they align themselves with staff, unfortunately, based on race, but that's the way it works in there. So,
How often was murder?
in terms of the inmates,
Yeah, all guards on inmates.
honestly, I don't know if it was so much murder, if it was suicide. The way the prison is set up, I mean, I would say every couple months. But here's just the thing: I worked in what was called a forensic treatment unit, and that is that's the highest level of inmate. They use what's called a PAC system, and it's PACT. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but that's how they classify their inmates. And unfortunately, you can get a guy that committed a very violent crime, but he could pack out at a very low level, which means he would go low level prison. Now, the forensic inmates are a different story because they are considered fives. That's the highest level. they're the most violent inmate. That I would say every couple months there was murders, there was always beatings, there was always that kind of stuff going on up there. They're very dangerous inmates though, and I did 2 years myself on that block because the way there was just so many cuts financially, they needed drug and alcohol counseling. Why I have no idea because they were all on Thorazine and they were out of their mind. But they would make me go over there to do therapy with them. I mean, and these guys are like, they're not even with it. So yeah, I think as far as murder, I think it was more suicide kind of stuff was going on. Again, you never know with corrections because it's really hard to get to the bottom of a story because everybody is lying. That's basically what it comes down to.
So you were working with insane inmates, like axe murderers and serial
Yes.
killers?
I had axe murders. I had a serial killer out of Philadelphia. Like I always had a goal of meeting every kind of inmate there was when I was in there. I was like, all right, I want to meet a serial killer. That's on the list. But yes, I did meet one that was out of Philadelphia, and he wasn't in there at that particular time for that, but he was being investigated for. In Philadelphia, they have the SEPTA system, which is their bus system, and apparently he was killing girls late at night through, obviously they position themselves in spots where they can get their victim very easy. So the SEPTA system allowed him to pick up young women via the bus stop and oh my God, I missed your stop. So hey, I'm gonna go back and yada yada yada. Yes, I had honest to God, when I would sit down and read these case files, I had numerous guys that killed their mother violently. I had an ex murder that ex murdered a bus driver to death. I mean, like when you start putting this in perspective and like me and you look at me and I start telling people I did this, they're like, you're so full of, like there's no way this woman did this. It's why I sent you my badge because I'm like, he's not going to believe me that I worked in this place. There's no way. So, it's yeah, it just the worst of the worst, and some of their behaviors are just so like disgusting in there too, in that unit. And they also have kind of like a midway between general population and the forensic treatment, which is called the ICU. They're a little bit more with it, but they're still not appropriate enough to be in general because general population will take advantage of them or whatever. Anything can happen in those situations.
So you've read the case file. What is then your security protocol when you sit down with a serial killer or an axe murderer?
None. Absolutely none. Absolutely none. I had no security. Like I had an office, obviously. They would come in my office, and I was very paranoid about, being accused of like something inappropriate behind closed doors. Because again, you got to remember, these are male inmates. Anything could be said. So my door was always open. There may have been a guard 50 yards down by his desk, but I didn't have a guard next to me at all. I was on my own. That's it.
And if it's a serial killer, would that person come in handcuffed and leg cuffed and belly cuffed and doing the
Uh,
penguin shuffle?
no, if I had gone to the unit, no. Actually, a lot of times those guys ask to be cuffed up, believe it or not. If they feel as though they're going to act out, they will ask, like, hey, can you cuff me today? Because I think I'm going to go over there and punch John's lights out. Yeah, some of them are that aware of it. So when I'm saying to you surreal and you're hearing this, you understand where I'm coming from when I say that.
What was the craziest thing you experienced?
Oh my God, where do I even? Oh, there's so many. What can I say on here, and I'm not going to get in trouble for
In trouble from who?
for my language. I mean, there's been
Oh
so
no,
many.
you're fine. You're fine. They said the first 5 minutes no swearing. That's what YouTube said. After that, you can use whatever language you want.
Okay. God, I've had so many stories. I don't even want to I don't even know where to start.
Well, give us your craziest ones.
There's so many. That's the problem, and I didn't write it. Let's see. I had a guy that was severely, severely bipolar. Like I'm talking really bipolar, medicated. He would go into manic fate, like really bad manic swings. Um, they were serving sausage for lunch one day, and he stuffed the sausage up his ass. That happened.
Mm.
they would shove light bulbs up their ass. I have no idea why. I still to this day cannot explain to you how that happened. Um, oh my God, there's so many. It's insane. I'm trying to think of crazy stories. My husband just
Slide over a little bit because you're going off the screen.
okay, going up. My husband just
That's
walked in.
better.
Okay. As far
Oh,
as
you've gone back off the screen again.
off screen. Okay,
Yeah, great.
better.
Yeah, keep going, keep going.
Let me look. Let me see. Just oh
Check
my God.
check what you've got on your list.
Yeah, craziest story. And my husband probably knows because he's heard every one of them. I do have my nose pierced. I almost had that ripped out of my nose. How that could even possibly happen, how anybody could even possibly do that is beyond me because you can't just rip those things out. They're like, you'd have to get really close to me.
What were the circumstances then of that situation?
The circumstances of that was Muslim, uh, generally African American Muslim men don't really like really white blonde haired women. We're called white witches. I don't know if you've ever heard that term in prison. The circumstances of that, it was a very radicalized Muslim who basically they kind of lied about, and he was stuffed away in our prison. He should not have been in a level 2 prison. He should have been in a level 5. He had assaulted other counselors, and I think I was like the fourth one on the list. And he had done something on the block, and I just said something to him about his behavior, and he came right at me, right at me. Thank God there was a CO there, but again, they're walking. These inmates are walking around, and that's kind of why you have to build alliances with some of the inmates in those areas too, because believe it or not, some of those inmates will step in and help you if you need it. Need be.
Yeah, sometimes there's been inmates I've tried to sexually assault staff and prisoners
Yeah,
have
that's
stopped it.
constant. That's constant. In fact, I had a very, very violent rapist on my caseload. And this is what I'm talking about when I say to you things get covered up and pushed under the rug. The guy was in for raping a young girl, violent. It was a violent rape, okay? And he had made the statement that when he gets out, he's going to violently rape me and another woman. And I reported it to management, obviously, to cover my ass. And they wrote up, there's like a way they can log behaviors in on the computer, like you can make a notation. I had taken it, wrote the notation into the computer because obviously if he got transferred out, I want the next counselor to know this information. Do you know management erased the comment? They erased that. So, there again, yeah, another person's blindly walking into, you don't realize how dangerous this is, guys. I know I'm going to get off here and I'm going to think of the most wildest story.
Were there any other occasions when prisoners laid hands on you?
No, there really wasn't. And I'm going to tell you why that was. I always had Aryan Brotherhood around me. The way it was set up is I worked in, I don't know, like, say, I don't know how Arizona works, but we had specialized, like, drug and alcohol units. And I worked in basically a drug and alcohol rehab, but yeah, I go out on the blocks as well. So my particular unit, they utilized inmates to help you, kind of, if that makes sense. They were kind of like what they call peer workers, and they were good. Most of them were Aryans. They would look out for you, so you sort of knew, you know what I mean, not to. And I'm actually really good. Like I will back down. I'm not getting into a fight with these guys. I'm not because they're gonna kill me. That's the reality. It would be smarter for me to walk away, obviously.
Did the Aryan guys try and pressure you to bring anything in for them?
No, Area mostly they see. You have to remember, I was one of those people that had a really, really big impact on their parole. So they needed to complete my program in order to get parole. So the only thing I would have would be like, well, is it possible you could have Mr. So and so's paperwork done? Because he's going to be seeing the board, and absolutely, I would do that. You know what I mean? If the guy's work doing is what he's supposed to be doing, you know, I'm going to make a positive recommendation.
So who are the highest profile prisoners you came across or know about in that
Uh,
system?
probably the highest one would have been DuPont. Do you remember that case?
What's the case?
He lost. Wait, I misunderstood you.
What was the story behind DuPont?
Okay, DuPont. It's the DuPont family, which are incredibly wealthy. You know that. DuPont was doing some kind of weird wrestling camp at his home. There was indications that he was actually gay and he was trying to basically sexually assault these young men that he was supposedly helping. This had gone on for years. I mean, I had heard of it when I was in my teens, so that would have been in the late 80s. Anyhow, he did commit a murder. He died in prison. He was crazier than a shithouse rat. That's the only way I could describe him. But he was loaded. So, of course, other inmates took advantage of him. I met him. There's been over the years many that I met. I'm trying to think of off the top of my head. But DuPont was definitely, I met him.
Ira
And
Einhorn.
Ira Einhorn, didn't meet him, but I did read the case. The case is phenomenal. Oh, the other one is Jerry Sandusky. Are you familiar with that one?
No, can you describe the case for both Ira and Jerry?
Okay, Einhorn was on the run for a long time. You know that?
No, no, tell everybody what he did and who he is.
Okay, Ira Einhorn was he was kind of like an Abby Hoffman of the 70s, which he was very political. He was a speaker in terms of, like the politics of the era. It was during the Vietnam time. So he kind of had a target on his back, really, from our government, from the door, as did Abby Hoffman was another one. Ira Einhorn supposedly killed his girlfriend and stuck her body in, I believe, a trunk and took the trunk and stuck it in his closet. Um, he claimed he never did it. He took off to France and he lived for about 20 years in France and they finally did get him. But the only reason they got him, they had a real obsessive cop and the family was really pushing, but they found him 30 years later and they did he's in the system right now. It's a yeah, it's a very big story. If you ever look up, right, I don't know if you want to write it down, but it's called The Unicorn Killer. Have you ever read that book before?
No.
Okay, that's about Ira Einhorn, and the girl's name I believe was Holly Maddox that he killed. The situation, and I don't know, I tend to be somebody that doesn't believe the government at all, and I don't believe their versions of incidences on any level. It's very questionable of whether he did it or not. He's never admitted to the crime. The circumstances that he kind of was like a Jim Morrison. Like the cops really he had a mark on his back. There's no question of that. There supposedly was released later that the CIA did have a lot of information on him. So again, is it conspiracy theory? I don't know. I honestly think that there may have been some truth to his story. My husband's flashing me right now. If you look up, it's John DuPont, and he was considered a Olympic swimming and wrestling trainer. My husband's flashing cards at me as we're sitting here.
Well, thank you him for helping.
Well, yeah, he needs to do that because I forget names. Um,
Jerry.
Jerry. Oh, okay, Sandusky.
Yeah.
He was a coach for Penn State. Are you familiar with Penn State
No, no,
University?
can you explain that to everybody watching?
Okay, I'm assuming in Britain. I don't know. I could be wrong, but do you guys have like colleges that are state run there?
We don't even have states.
Okay, but okay, how would I put it? Is there college that Britain runs? Like, do they have stuff like that?
Okay, so they have government education provided by the government, and they also have private education, which is called independent
Okay,
schools.
okay, that's what we have. Okay, all right. Jerry Sandusky worked for Penn State, which was Pennsylvania State University College, and he was a coach. And I'm gonna say 30 years, if not more. He was sexually assaulting his all of his kids. It went on for years, and Penn State in Pennsylvania is such a big university, and they have satellite universities all over the place, but people are so into their football games, and any Penn State activity is like huge here. I guess would be considered like your rugby is what I'm assuming. kind of that kind of thing. It came out in the 70s he was abusing people, but nobody was believing him. Finally, it came down. I read the case file on it. It was unbelievable. There's no question the guy was guilty, but like reading the psychological profile on it, it was so well done because you never saw that. You used to see really badly done or very poorly done psychological evals. The guy was a lunatic, and he's one of those people that needs to stay behind bars for the rest of his life. But yeah, he actually sexually assaulted, like, I'm talking like 50 plus on up young men. I mean, he would brutally sodomize them. He would do all kinds of stuff. So yeah, and I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't reported. It was reported to everybody, but nobody believed him, and that seems to be a real big trend in the United States. Nobody ever believes anything, you know, ever when you say you're sexually assaulted here. So,
And speaking of sexual assault, Bill Cosby's in the system now.
yes, it was funny because I watched there was a piece that you had done on him, and I don't know if it was it He'll Survive It or what's it like. He's at SCI Phoenix right now, which I believe was SCI Greaterford, which that Greaterford was a very nasty big prison. Okay, that's where the bad boys go. I've actually been in Greaterford. I've walked the halls of Greaterford. It's a pretty scary place, and um, yeah, it's not a good place, but yeah. So he's at SCI Phoenix. It's a brand new facility. It's what's called a prototypical here in the United States, which means it's all computerized, yada yada yada. Um, I was watching your one video about him in terms of I don't really know how much trouble he will have in prison for the fact that he has money. You just don't know. You know what I mean? Like I know a lot of times you'll say like kill on sight. PA seems to almost coddle the sex offenders, and they use them as rats. They use them as rats like you have no idea. They'll purposely put a sex offender that's working for them on a unit just to monitor staff. Like that kind of stuff goes on all the time. And it blows my mind because this sex offender was incredible in court, but now he's credible in prison. Like the dynamic is incredible to think about. But yeah, Cosby, I'm following closely. I wish I still worked there because I actually could have gotten you the paperwork and you would actually have been able to see it. But because I had access to all of that, I had access to their bank accounts, I had access to all that information. And when you do, you can really build a great psychological picture of this guy and what's going on with him. But yeah, that was some of them. I'm trying to think. Did I ever tell my husband any other weird stories I ever tell you? Oh, that, and I'm going to get to that, beatings. Yeah, he has a note here telling me of beatings, hearing beatings, and seeing beatings. Yes, that is one of the biggest things. Inmates got beaten up a lot by corrections officers. I saw one guy who was drugged down. I don't know if you have them in the UK or not, but they're metal, the metal stairs that are like they're metal, but they're open. They have the holes in them that almost look like a cheese grater. I saw an inmate's face taken up right up and down on that. CO did that to him. I've seen COs beat numerous inmates. That's like the norm. And my one girlfriend was a psychologist there, and she reported it. By reporting it, she started. The guy who had did it was also a local police officer from where I'm at. So by her reporting that, she was receiving death threats at home. She had to go out and buy a gun. So you got to remember the blues stick together up there in terms of, you know what I mean, the men. The women, it would not so much because there's not many women in corrections, and really we're kind of disposable. You know what I mean? They don't really give a lot. They don't really care about women. I hate to say it, but any of these women that get promoted, I think I might have put that in one of my emails, generally get promoted by wearing knee pads, meaning that they spend their days on their knees blowing somebody in management. That's how you get promoted in these places, and I'm not even kidding you.
Wow.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to say to you too, I think it was in your Bill Cosby thing. It was you had mentioned Susan McNaughton. Do you remember that?
Can't remember.
Well, you said the press secretary, the press person for Cosby that spoke. Um, the name of the woman is Susan McNaughton. She's been around forever. They have these real hokey press secretaries that the kind of, you know what I mean? The narrative is complete bullshit. So
Yeah.
whatever they're putting out there, it's a complete lie. One thing that you need, if you have time to look up, is the Camp Hill riots. Are you familiar with that at all?
Oh, what's that?
Okay. In 1980s, there's been two major riots in the United States. One at Attica. Okay, that's a very famous one. There was also a riot in Camp Hill. They were extremely violent riots, and I believe they started over Islamic stuff and not being given the correct food that they were supposed to be given. But again, it was a powder keg anyway. It was one of those situations where you could feel it was ready to kick, so something was going to happen. The reason I'm telling you this is because the press secretary got on TV to the state of Pennsylvania and said everything was under control. At that very moment he said that, the second riot started in that. Like there was two riots that happened. The second riot happened where even more staff died while he was on TV saying that. So I mean, they put up a big lie, big illusions. You know, it's a bunch of bullshit
Yeah,
basically.
they were trying to say Bill Cosby was going to general population to give the impression that he wasn't getting any special treatment, but it was all bullshit as well,
I
wasn't
don't.
it?
When I read that, I don't think they will put him in general. To be
No, it
honest
was
with
it
you.
was it was a hoax just to try and make the public feel he wasn't getting special treatment.
Yeah, I would at very best, I would say he's probably going to get set to, I can't even think of the name of it, but there's a geriatric prison in the state. He might get sent there, but yeah, he'll receive special treatment. Don't, yeah, there's no question about that. He definitely will receive special treatment. So
So
I would,
you was a chief shop steward and a state rep for 3 prisons. What does that even mean?
oh God. Okay, hold on. Wait, I dropped my pen. Okay, chief shop steward. Okay, I represented the union. I was the union that there's those are all unionized jobs. Just so you know, like there's three different unions in there. I was in PSSU. And PSSU is the Pennsylvania Social Services Union. And the reason I joined the union and got so involved with it, it was kind of like a safety mechanism for me. I felt the more information I got out of that place, because they like to keep everything in house, the more protected I would be, and basically the less they would screw with me. And that's kind of how it works. If you're female, you don't have many options for protection. I mean, you kind of have to date COs, like correction officers, just so you have that line of protection. It's kind of pathetic when you look at it. But anyway, okay, chief shop steward means that I'm going to be the person that you're going to come to say, well, look, they're not following contract, so can we grieve this? And I was brutal. I have a terrible reputation as a shop steward because I would grieve them on anything and everything. Because you know what? Why am I paying union dues if I'm not, if why? I could just have an attorney on retainer, So I got really good at it. The other thing in Pennsylvania, and I'm not sure about other prisons, but they're under what's called a code of ethics. And for some reason, I have no idea why, the code of ethics, they get in their minds that that supersedes our United States Constitution, and it doesn't. But that's how whacked out these people are. But anyhow, the code of ethics kind of becomes a tool for them to get rid of people. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh well, you talk to a guy that was a former inmate, so we're going to fire you, and that's a big issue. Like for the time that I was involved there, I couldn't even have this conversation with you if they found out about that. That's how screwed up that is. So your life is very controlled by them, very controlled. To the point where they would drive by my house to see who's in my driveway, whose car is that, and I would find this out through my friends. I digress. What was I talking about? I forgot now.
Being a chief shop steward and state rep for 3 prisons.
Oh, yeah. So I became a chief shop steward for SCI Waymar. I did that for 10 years plus. And then for about 5 years, I was what was called a regional shop steward. And basically, it's a voted position. I actually had to be elected and voted into that position by my union. And that meant that I was a rep for SCI Waymart, where I worked at, SCI Dallas, which is another prison, which is a very, very nasty prison, and SCI Retreat. So I represented probably somewhere between, I would say, 1,000 and 2,000 employees, somewhere in that vicinity. What it allowed me to do was every month I got to go to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania State Capitol. But what happened was is I was the secretary. I mean, even though I was part of this group, I was the one taking the notes. So I could rat anybody out I wanted to. So if some manager was acting like an ass, guess what? His name appeared in those notes, and I made sure of it. I, you know, it was like, why are we covering for these people? Corrections in Pennsylvania, again, and I'm sure it's the same way as it is in Arizona, the people on the top are not unionized, but they're so top heavy. I mean, starting salaries are like 200,000. Like, I'm not even kidding you. These guys don't even leave their offices. They don't even interact with inmates. These are just these are guys that just do nothing. And they're generally people that are very connected to the community. They're related to judges, lawyers, police, that kind of thing. So a lot of nepotism, a lot of crazy stuff like that. So
So you say mass incarceration is a shakedown, for-profit shakedown on the taxpayers?
oh my God, yeah. Oh, the whole business is based on bodies, and I think somewhere in one of your podcasts you said 50,000 inmate. You were right on the nose with that. If somebody is sicker, it's going to be more expensive. The whole thing is about money, and it's sad because it's money made on human misery is what it is. I mean, and I think for me that was the biggest struggle because even though I took the money, I'm making money on people's lives that are being ruined. And it's not just the inmate, it's his family, it's his kids, people automatically think the inmate, they don't think about all the other pieces in it, that it's everybody that is affected by it. At least 10 people around that inmate are affected by it. But no, it's a huge for profit. It's a business. It's like any other business. It's all about money. From when you go to court, paying the parking meters down at the courthouse, to when you get into prison and you're buying commissary, those vendors are specialized vendors, and you got to remember, a lot of times those specialized vendors are relatives of people that are in the system. So everybody's hooking up everybody when it comes to this whole thing at the taxpayer's dime. That's the sad part about it.
I found that a lot of prisoners were just low-level drug users, people with
Yep,
addiction issues, and
yep,
soldiers. A lot of soldiers,
yep,
traumatized, come back from
yep,
wars, didn't get any
yep.
help at all.
No, no, and sadly, there's very little treatment. There's very little, there's nothing. I mean, I don't know if I've even have, other than what I did as far as therapy goes, I never saw a psychologist constantly meeting with guys that came back from Iraq, at all. I never saw it. I think they may have had a VA rep come in every maybe 6 months. I'm not 100% sure on that, but no, there was nothing provided for them at all.
Did you think the government just uses them and then throws them away when they come back from these wars?
I think the government uses everybody that's involved in the whole system. I think that from the employees to the inmates to, just maybe a select few on top that are like white, elite, rich, very rich people, I think everybody in that system is collateral damage, and it's all money. It's all based on money. It's sad, but it's all based on money, and we are disposable. And if I'm fired, there's 10 people waiting to take my spot because these little communities have no, there's no jobs. These jobs are solid. There's retirements, there's health benefits. One of the trends that I was starting to notice though was people were they were firing people like a lot. And they were firing people for nonsense things. They use what's called an ion scan. I don't know if you're familiar with what that is. Ion scan tests your hands when you walk in the door to see if there's any drug residue on it. They're like not accurate at all. I mean, the stats are so low on them. If you handle a $10 bill, there's going to be cocaine residue on that if you went to, buy gas in the morning. So after I had left, a lot of people were fired. The reason they're firing people is because they don't want to have to pay out that pension. There's a law in this state that if you get arrested from a state job, they keep your pension.
Mm.
So just think about how much money, I mean, they're keeping. I mean, these are big pensions these people are getting, and every dime of it goes to them.
So everybody I know in America, they have a friend or a family member in prison.
Oh my God.
America's got 1 in 100 adults in prison, 25% of the world's prison population. Aren't the
Yep.
people over there sick of it? Aren't they fighting against it?
Yeah, but I think people are really scared because I know, like, and I've heard different people say it. Government has a lot of money. People that the regular person doesn't have a lot of money to fight these things. And yeah, we're very sick of it. And yeah, every case should be going to trial. And we should bankrupt the system. But to get any American to mobilize and do that, it's just nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to tackle it because what's going to happen is they're going to find one way, shape, or form to screw with you. And that's where the second part of my story comes in because it gets to be more interesting. There's more to all of this. Um, but yeah, no, it's a big thing, and I've always been very verbal about that. Like, why are you allowing this? Like, why? Um, Pennsylvania is a very, very rural area. You know, these families have lived here forever. I was originally from New York State, so when I came here, it was such a culture shock for me because they don't play by the rules here. It's absolutely insane to me that the lack of it. But yeah, it's a big business. Vendors, people that make their underwear. When you start adding up all these different pieces, you're like, oh my God, this is like insane. I will tell you a really good story, which is a real good example of them utilizing money. I had gone to a training and it was for drug and alcohol. And the guy's name was Dr. David Simord, and he was out of Canada. So me being me, which means I'm being an asshole, I went home and I Googled him. And what came up was that the guy basically in Canada was like a joke. Like he had gone in front of judges in Canada. He said that he had a way to figure out if a guy was absolutely 100% guaranteed to commit a crime again, which is impossible. That there's no way to predict that. Even the worst inmate, he may never commit a crime again. I mean, you can't predict that. So the Department of Corrections paid this guy over $1 million to provide a 2-day training. Wait, it gets better to all of the like my unionized people. So me being me, I called up one of my connections in Harrisburg and I said, listen, I found this article and this guy is it's a bunch of shit. This guy is lying, this whole thing, and it needs to be exposed. So my mentor said to me, he goes, do it. He goes, if you're gonna do it, be prepared because they're going to come after you for it. I was like, yeah, I don't give a shit. Come after me. So I took the article. I printed it to everybody. I sent it to everybody email. I did it on my off time because I figured, well, they can't get me for doing something on my off time. By the third session, people were coming to him with this article going, I got this from my union. Can you explain this? Why is everybody like laughing at me? Oh, yeah. I did end up getting in big trouble for that, but I did end up beating it. So, yeah, I mean, that's the name of the game. But it turns out he was related to somebody. So that's what they do. They hand out these $1 million contracts to their friends, and, there we go.
Well, it's good to hear it from an insider because I've been ranting about this, for years, but
Yeah.
people just say, well, he's an ex-con. But to hear this from somebody who's worked in the system really reinforces the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. Me personally, I have never seen people as an ex-con. Like, when you have to work with a person, like on a psychological level, you have to separate their crime from the person because you can't. I'm not treating the crime. I'm treating the person. So I have to be able to have the ability to separate that. And I've always been really good at that. Like, I do not judge. I don't care. People make mistakes. That's the reality. you
Earlier
know.
on, you said there was a second part to your story. There was something else. Is that something that you can't disclose at this point?
What was that? Oh, second part of the story? Yes, there's a second part. You ready for this one?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So I'm gonna back up a little bit. In 2008, I got really mysteriously ill. Okay, to the point where like I was hospitalized in the ICU for a long time. It turns out I contracted a virus, kind of like what's going on right now with the COVID-19, but mine was called Coxsackie B virus. And what had happened was is the virus, I didn't know this at the time. Now, mind you, at this point I've got 10 years in. I'm 38 years old. I'm full of energy. I'm your average 38-year-old. And I went from that to, nothing within like a week. What had happened was is the virus traveled to my heart. And I didn't know viruses can do that, but I guess viruses can enter major organs. And when they do that, they destroy the organ. So my heart got basically trashed because of a virus. Now, if I was a 100% conspiracy theorist, I would say that maybe it's possible that that virus could have been left in my office or that virus was around me somehow. The only way I could have gotten that virus was up at that prison. The reason I say that, I was in a high risk area. I worked with all guys that had hepatitis C, HIV. They had MRSA, which is that a staph infection that's it's resistant. So I was around a lot of that stuff. In fact, when I got sick, they said to me, they said, "Do you think you have hepatitis C?" I said, "Absolutely." I said, "I've been bled on." I said, "You name it." So it wouldn't have been a shock to me. So at that point, I was off for about 2 months, and then I came back. I tried to work for a while with it, but it was almost like I had had a heart attack. So it was like I wasn't bouncing back, even because they put me on a lot of medication. It was too hard. In my mind, over the years, when I try to put it together, I'm thinking maybe they did this to me. I don't know. I mean, how do you know with the stuff that goes on? You know anything's possible. So anyhow, I was on what was called FMLA, and that's Family Medical Leave in the United States. Clinton is the one that put that in place. Family medical leave was generally made for women that were pregnant because they were giving people so much problems with maternity leave. But as it is now, it expands into if you get ill, you can go on FMLA. Now, what that means is you call off, say you call off a day, okay? You just don't get paid for the day, but you're cleared because the doctor signed off on it, right? So that in my mind, that's enough of a punishment not getting paid, right? I mean, anybody would think that. They don't like that. They don't like that at all. So now in 2008, I start becoming a liability. And I wish I was more of a liability looking back because had I fallen up there, I probably would have a lot more money than I do now. But it, it's one of those things. Like I say, they'll use you until you're not you know what I mean. They can't use you anymore. So what ended up happening is I took early retirement, and it was to a point where I couldn't go back. Like once you're out of that, and once you're out of that environment, and once you're out of that paranoia, because you got to remember you're always like, again, I'm a shop steward. They could plant drugs in my office. They could plant drugs on anything. I'm going to jail. So you know what I mean? It's such you're so paranoid in that environment. So I ended up not going back. I was fine. There was nothing going on. I met my husband in 2013. My husband has done state time. My husband is a felon. He was basically, drug trafficking, that kind of bullshit. I don't care. You know what I mean? I didn't marry the crime. I married my husband. So all of a sudden, he gets contacted by his parole agent. Now, I have dated some of those parole agents, so this becomes really twisted. When they found out that I was with him and that we were getting married, they went nuts. They sat him down and they were like, well, like, why? Why are you marrying her? As of now, because I married an inmate, I'm now an enemy, basically. I'm on the other side now. Okay, that's basically what happened. So, prior to, let me just look at my notes here. Okay, just to back it up on me, I've never been in trouble with the law. I didn't even have detention in high school. That's how, like, you know what I mean, straight laced I was in terms of that. So I get married to him. We're married a couple of years, and all of a sudden, we live in Carbondale, Pennsylvania, which is a small town in Pennsylvania, very poor town. That's one of the reasons we're moving. My husband starts getting followed around like everywhere he goes. He owned a pawn store at that time. So they had come in several times, undercover cops trying to do controlled buys off of him. He wasn't falling for it. He's been in the, you know what I mean? He had been in that game for so long. He knew every trick in the book. So I was a gun owner. I legally have the right to own a gun. My husband cannot own a gun because he's a felon. However, it becomes an issue when you've got a married couple because technically I can own a gun. It has to be kept in a locked case. It can't be around him. Gun was never around him. Reason I had the gun is I was working at the pawn store. I was handling a lot of cash, like lots of cash, gold. I was making gold runs to Philadelphia. I needed something. So what did I have, a 22? I had a 22.
I think you're about to slip off the screen again. Can you just move to the side?
Sure.
There
Better?
you go. A bit more. Can you go more?
Hold on, I'm going to actually sit on my leg. I bought a 22. Is that better?
No. Go more to the side.
To the side?
Yes, there. Stay there. Yeah. That's it.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. So I had a concealed carry license. I had my guns registered. Like I did everything by the book that I was supposed to do. Guns were locked up from him. He had no access to them. So in 2017, I get arrested because I have a gun. Now, I'm trying to explain to them that I have a license for it, yada, 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 all this stuff. They haul him right off to jail because he's a felon. So they didn't even charge him with a crime until a week and a half later. So he sat in a jail cell, which that is that's so far from our Constitution. You cannot do that. Like you have to charge him. You can't let somebody just sit there. So it was, and I somebody who's
Looks like we've lost the signal. Let's see if you're going to come back. There you are. Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You're fine, yeah.
So they take me to jail. I do like 3 days in jail. They have to separate me because now they have my wallet and they realize that I work for corrections. They're like, oh fuck, now we gotta separate her. Plus, on top of it, I'm sick. So this is all like an issue. So my husband ends up doing a year. They literally like in a day, Shaun, one day they just pulled my husband out of the picture. That was it. I was left to pick up the pieces. We had 3 businesses at the time, 2 of which had to be shut down. I had to shut them down. I had to come up with close to 30 grand, if not more, for attorney fees. It might even be higher. I'm not even sure at this point. I just know that my mom had to give me like a lot of money to get him out of there. So finally, he ended up getting out after a year. He had to take a deal. I mean, unfortunately, he would have gone to trial, but it was just, I mean, we just couldn't afford it. He took a deal, and they have, what is it? It's called constructive possession. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term. Have you heard of that term before? Okay. It's kind of a new law in the books in the United States, but it's basically like if you, say you and I were in a car and you had marijuana on you and you got pulled over and the cops frisked you and they got the marijuana, I would get charged with it too because even if I didn't know about it, I was still around it. So this is their little loophole for everything. So they charged my husband with constructive gun possession because they had no proof, but he supposedly was around my guns. Okay, so the night that this happened, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. It was August of 2017, right? August 9th of 2017. this is how this goes down. This is how fast this happens. I'm outside, I'm walking the dog, I have my pit bull, I'm sitting on the front porch, and I swear to God, out of nowhere, four probably 250-pound cops, I had four assault weapons pointed at my head. I'm sitting in a chair with like, and when you're thinking about this stuff, it's like you forget these details. And I'm thinking, my God, any one of these morons that doesn't even have a high school education could have slipped in a heartbeat and shot me. These are assault rifles we're talking about. So, in the process of that whole thing, they had to search me. There was no woman CO or officer present. So how do you search a woman? Well, technically you're supposed to call somebody. That's how it works here. They didn't. They searched me. Okay, so I was sexually assaulted during this whole thing. They grabbed my breasts like there was no tomorrow. And then the gun was down the back of my pants. I had no underwear on. So, of course, the officer had to stick his finger down. I don't even want to say it. But you could fill in the pictures with no gloves on. Yes. Okay. So this is
Oh,
he's shaking his head. This is reported to the FBI here. This is reported to the Department of Justice. This is reported to everybody. Do you know this cop is still working? Do you know nothing happened to this cop at all?
oh, it's terrible.
So he was allowed to get away with sexual assault is what it came down to. God only knows how many other women he's done it to. So all of this mess that happens is over with, okay? what was it? Back me up here, Michael. 2018, was I done? Okay, long story short, I ended up getting house arrest. I took a plea bargain. I got house arrest for 2 months and 2 years probation, which I thought was pretty hefty, but I took it anyway. Because you just, at that point, they've drugged you through the mud for so long. You just want to be done with it. So much money's been spent. So I'm literally off of house arrest for 2 days, 3 days at best. And my probation officer calls me and says, we need to speak with you. My husband came with me, and we got arrested again by the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania. So 3 years of going through this shit with Pennsylvania, we are still in the midst of it right now. I don't know who I pissed off. I pissed off somebody along the lines that is making calls or something. But we are right in the middle of it. And right now we're dealing with the state attorney general's office for stuff related back to that crime that happened in 2017.
How
I
they
think
how they create work for themselves, isn't it? It's just a bunch of bullshit.
it is not only that, they create work, and who's paying for all of that?
Taxpayers, it's endless money from the taxpayers.
Exactly. And you know what's even better is my husband kind of was onto them. He kind of thought something was up. He started tape recording them, and he was tape recording them following him. When we got them on stand, they said they were watching him for they thought he was trafficking guns and drugs for 13 months. They found nothing in our house except for my registered guns. So, like, who's paying for this sting for 13 months? That's taxpayer money right there.
By getting a conviction, it justifies the phony investigation.
Yep, yep, yep. So right now, as it stands today, we are in the middle of this disaster yet again, and our options are to take a deal, take it to trial, or I guess suicide. I don't know. I mean, really, what options do I have at this point? So basically, in a nutshell, I mean, are they screwing with him? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I never had problems until I got married. They didn't like the fact I married a felon. I don't see anything wrong with that. In my mind, there's nothing wrong with that. So maybe I'm the one I don't know. But the problem is it's just, that's an issue for them. They don't like it. And, oh yeah, he's flagging me too. When they searched our house, they had no search warrant, and admitted on stand they had no search warrant.
That's the fruit from the forbidden tree.
Yeah, that's what he said too. Yeah, the case should have been tossed, right?
Yeah.
No, didn't happen. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right now. So somewhere along the lines, I really pissed somebody off for all this to have come down. It could have been one of the guys that I dated. His brother was he worked for state attorney generals in California. I mean, these people are like that. They'll make a call and say, "Look, this is I want you to start following her. I want you to do this." I mean, they're wacky about these jobs. It's a fucking job. It's not your life. Like, come on already.
So is there anything that the people watching this can do to help you?
Um, I honestly don't know. I at this point I really don't know. I guess call the Attorney General's office in Pennsylvania if they want to. I don't know. I mean, it's just honestly, I just want to be left alone. He wants to be left alone. We just like I can't do this anymore. That's the bottom line. I don't have a third time. I didn't even have a second time in me. To do 20 years in prison working and now potentially looking at this situation. I can't do it anymore.
If people want to reach out and send you a message, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Oh, that would well, I'll give you my email. Would that work?
Yeah, email, that's fine. Are you on any of the socials?
I'm on Facebook under Laura Wormuth. You have that. And my email is Lora, it's Lora, okay, and Wormuth, it's just one together, at gmail.com, which I think you have because you were messaging me.
I'll put all of that in the description box below this video. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the people watching this?
Well, I think I want people to wake up. I think people need to wake up. I think people need to start mobilizing. I think people need to start calling their state reps. I think people need to start, fighting because, even though they don't have money to fight, you still can fight other ways. You could still protest. You could still make phone calls. But this stuff, it's not just me. I mean, there's people. This I can't even imagine if you have no money and you have to take a public defender, what they're doing to these poor people. I just can't imagine. And it's so sad when you look at that picture that, my God, these people, many of these, and honestly, there's so many times in my head when I would read paperwork, I'd be like, this isn't adding up to me. Something's not right here, you know? Um, I don't know. But that's kind of where we're at. I mean, is there any questions for you that you want to ask me?
No, I think we've done over an hour right now. I think we've got a good handle on your story. So I'm going to tell people that if they have questions for you, to put them in the comments below this video. Please let us know what you thought about this video today, this interview with Laura, and a very brave woman indeed. You got nothing but my respect for speaking out, especially considering that you're in the middle of a situation right now. Very, very brave indeed. So thanks very much for coming on, Laura. Cheers.
So, thank you. Thank you for contacting me. It was a great honor.